Well, it's again with my face and my privacy and all that. It's I have to doctor. Obviously, you have more YouTubers that do this thing sort of far professionally than rather than me, the nobody on the internet. But I have to think maybe I can chip in the conversation, the topic a bit on the reflections of what our current society is like today in terms of the whole argument of the increasing violence that is being enacted upon oneself and others in terms of gender wars, in terms of what we say is, oh, we're incels, or, men are incels, or, this and misogynist and all these division that, people have in order to propagate hate on a particular group so as to use that mechanism of scapegoating as something to be cognitively, unburdened by. I don't know. It's quite. I'm quite tired, but anyways, the cognitive dissonance of society today is incredibly uh, getting worse. And the thing is that as human beings, we have to understand that people want what's best for their survival. And when we look at the news, right, we've got so many people who killed, rapists and predators in the name of justice. And while that works temporarily, I'm not trying to be the devil's advocate here, I guess I am. Everyone is unique in a situation where it's bad or it's good, and it's neurology. We can stamp out the weeds for as long as it takes, and the garden needs to be up, but the garden needs to be uprooted. The soil, topsoil needs to be uprooted. That is an analogy and a metaphor for the system that we are living in. You've got so many doctors, therapists, like Gamer GG online, and all these red pill or black pill or whatever. And to be honest, the majority of incels don't actually watch Andrew Tate. They've heard him and they've watched some of the content, but most people disagree because it's not applicable to the situation. Most people are actually just living in negative feedback loops, hate-filled forums, to which, sometimes it even really is quite, I wouldn't say it's quite inevitable with the way it has become, because it's an ancient phenomenon that has become globalized in terms of technology. I think there isn't one solution, one answer to this issue. Or if there is, people are always going to perpetrate hate onto one group. Recently I've been reading the manga Higurashi, the newest arc, and I kind of understand where society is going to. There's one group and there's the other group, and both groups are trying to coexist peacefully, and that's where we are now. The thing is that I feel like, despite what people say about the conspiracy theorists and all that, the general consensus is that we, as human beings, are beholden to Mother Nature. We are not very self-aware as of yet, despite all the technological advances that we've made. We fail to see the inner workings of our social mechanisms. We are a group that which it is easier to ostracize someone than to welcome someone in their fold and care for them like one of their own. It is easier for you to exclude somebody when somebody breaks the rules and kill them, which has worked since ancient times, but it has not worked to get rid of that issue at hand. You can kill a rapist, you can kill a predator, but it's a genetic issue that is outside of our minds and possibly our bodies. We have to work to figure that out instead of shoot first, ask questions later. But of course, once the deed's done, you gotta do it, right? You gotta punish the perpetrator. But the issue is that we've been doing it for so long that it just doesn't work that way. The majority of humans right now living in Western countries are calling for violence against individuals who are actually left out. They are even including this to include society is basically getting more ableist. And you might think, hey, isn't that a good thing? We've actually forgotten the notion that survival of the fittest is not actually the fastest, the strongest, the most moral, superior, this and that. It's about coexisting and cohabitating and cooperation. I mean, millions of years of evolution of human beings reproducing, and so far, we've kind of forgotten, new generations forgotten how, because it's actually a genetic decline. It clearly is, because the more, all the modern technologies, all the advances in the refinements of our culture, food, everything, has gotten us actually quite sick. And people refuse to believe that. People think that everything's about science now. It's about ridiculing and mocking those who are willing to open up, who are willing to share voice. It's easy to demonize groups instead of realizing that we need to work together and we need to figure out the causes. I read so many news articles today about 13-year-old girl has to move to different schools because of the misogynists. And I'm like, well, what I read in there was just blatant propaganda. Not propaganda, as in just sheer, anyone can write a piece in an article and come up with that kind of story. Even if it's true, they could fabricate it. Not saying that it did not happen, but it's saying that you can manipulate facts, clearly. It's easier to blame men, because men are obviously, by nature, disposable. When I was born, I was supposed to be the female, but instead I got born with my brother. People have usually a single child, or twins, or siblings. But the thing is, it's dependent on the genetics of the mother. And people always have to blame the male, because it's so easy to do that without realizing that everything that you are comes from both your parents. People refuse to take the responsibility. That of course you are responsible at the age of 10 to decide how you're going to live your life, and most people are taught not to do that. Some people are taught to do that because they're in circles of which they already chosen to be successful. Some are rags to riches stories. The majority of people are either born lucky, or I wouldn't say born lucky, but you look at Mike Tyson and all the famous, it depends on the backgrounds of these individuals. When you look at the modern phenomenon of the gender war, men in particular, and how many men have taught self-advice on YouTube. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to explain why is it like that. The key case is that men are devoid of intimacy within their families, and intimacy and trust from other people that are potential friends. We've lost trust in society completely. One time I couldn't even go out to my neighbors' houses to ask for jump starter cables just to hotwire my car and jump start my car. Of course, people have their own reasons, but they're like, oh, maybe it's because it's ridiculous, and people have the right to do that, but it's also very, very telling about how our society has become. It's only interested in materialism instead of true intimacy. It's a hypocritical thing too, because let's take, for example, Japan or the United States, or other countries that have outlawed prostitution. They make so much fucking pornography there. They can't even legalize prostitution, which is essentially even the same damn thing. Uh, People are like that. You can't really do much to change the tide. People will always find a way to demonize, mock, and ridicule to make themselves feel better. So as not to actually think they're the ones who are just as much of a problem as the incels are, or whoever this are, or the criminals are, and all that kind of stuff. But, it's easy to put the onus on a group. Particularly, I've seen, like, you go on Instagram news feeds and you see all these individuals. Like, I saw one Instagram reel lately that was this guy who did a kimura on his partner and then he broke it. It's like, and everyone's like, oh, it's his fault, he didn't tap. And all that. To be honest, it's disgusting. This is not, it's not World War III yet. It's not it's not, you're not even in a combat zone. You're not even in self-defense mode. You're just sparring with a partner. In the UFC, that's a completely different thing. You can that's kind of suited for it. In boxing as well, in boxing rings. But in something like, jiu-jitsu, okay, fine. You can justify whatever you want to. But the problem is, the partners have to know. You can't kill each other. It's not Shiai in judo. It's sort of like that, but even in judo, they get the players who act that out completely get banned from competition. So judo has that mentality of safety, which is what Kano Jigoro did. And the Western world, of course, which is combat oriented because of its past histories, that it's trying to influence the world over as well, is trying to say that war is good, violence is good, and we must fight one another, and it's your fault if you lose. Which in turn Japan has that too, that mentality too, but it recognizes that it must be important to know the situation, which is which. Same thing as if we could figure it out now, which is which, in terms of gender, all the wars and stuff. And I think it's hard to even fix this problem at all in our lifetimes, because men are so emotionally and sexually and intimately deprived, because in our nature it's sex is like you're releasing an endorphin drugs. Everything's about this, and it's like a magic pill. Like sex is probably like having orgasm is the closest magic pill to feeling like euphoric, like trance-like, free from your body. But it's just chemicals rushing it all at once, and who knows about the spiritual point of view. But perhaps it's also negative now that we are consumed, over addicted to porn and all that, because of the perfection that man is innately needed in order to feel better about himself. So that's why porn is an inevitability of the business side of sexualization and sexualizing women, men's bodies, and objectifying both men and women's bodies. But it's a double-edged sword. Today in the Western world, we're like saying, we defend the sexuality of young women, older women, but we also at the same time hate this kind of sexualization and stuff like that, and then we blame everything on the males. The males, truth be told, yeah, it's kind of their fault, right? But the sexually successful males don't think it's their fault. They're the ones controlling the shows. They are. When you see women who are going on OnlyFans and all that kind of stuff, they're the ones actually contributing to the problem. But they are not the sole ones. They're not the sole issue. They're doing it because they also want to get the attention of the sexually successful males that do that kind of stuff. It's the average. It's the males who are not fit to the standards of the Western world, or some Asian societies that we're lived up to, right? So that's the issue in of itself. Like, for example, if I'm a short guy, right, which I am, you're always going to be comparing yourself to a bigger guy. But I know during my time when I did judo and um, there's this martial art called guoshu in Chinese. I don't know. I only did it for a month because it was so niche. Because I was introduced by my friend as an extra from Mulan. His name was Jay, and it was something that I've never seen before. And he was shorter than me, much shorter, and he could whoop my ass. Well, even the master could, and he is skinnier than me. I saw things that I've never seen on movies, not even Donnie Yen that I've seen. But he probably knows about this. Donnie Yen knows about this kind of stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that you just don't know that. You don't know that actually the concept of the culture that you live in dictates how, of course, like, I forgot what I was going to say. I got ADHD and stuff like that, but what I'm trying to say is that the thing is, within what we see today in terms of, the sexual revolutions and all that, with what we see, yes, little guys can beat your ass just as much, but society's telling us, we want the big man to win because the big man is clearly fit to win. Well, we descended from a lineage of particular type of apes that have chimpanzee and bonobo type DNAs and possibly gorillas. It's a mix, it's a bunch. I haven't done too much research into it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not qualified to talk about this subject at all because you just have to simply research it for yourself. And I can say that what I can say is that the thing is, men have to cooperate now ever more than before. If we continue to compete and we continue to kill each other for reproductive rights, and we impose certain rules on each other to make us feel insecure and jealous, you can't really blame a phenomenon as of that incels appearing, right? Because fundamentally, humans want to evolve. Everyone wants to survive. Everyone wants to live. And the thing is, when you feel left out, is like a representation of something that is impeding on your security of survival and how well you can thrive. Humans now are saying in Western society is you ought to let go, you ought to just be this, you ought to, it's basically being like classist and ableist. They're saying, no, you stay there, you stay in your lane. They'll say whatever you want to say. I mean, sure, Mark Manson, he's kind of right in a way, but it's not a one magic pill for everyone. And one magic pill, in fact, is really just cooperation. We have to allow, it's like, ironically, the racists are kind of right in saying go back to your home country, because what they're meaning by is that you are suited in your own environment. Therefore, you should go back to your own environment to thrive in there. But you're such in a foreign environment now that how are you going to compete? How are you going to live? How are you going to survive? Well, look at China. Even the people that I've met from China are saying that China is so competitive now that there's simply no chance for cooperation, despite. And you might think, no, well, let's say something about our survival of the fittest thing. It's proven true. Well, yeah, but not really, because when you look at people who compete rather than cooperate, their lineages tend to die out more quicker, or they're impacted by some certain thing than those who cooperate. We now are in an era where criminality is rising, where people are becoming more sexually deviant. And why is that? Because men are simply starved of intimacy, and well, it's probably just the news that's also trying to propagate some kind of like focus that topic rather than focus on something else. It's easy to focus on one topic and get people to be socially engineered to demonize and hate by like the 1984 2-minute hate thing, but it's hard to get people to get them to shift their attention because they themselves have to shift their attention onto that topic, which is your freedoms, your rights, your ability to love and be compassionate, especially females. It's not just the males. Males compete. Males males do all the biddings for females. But until we stop trying to do that and we cooperate with the males who are lesser than us, and we fight for them to be better, instead of leaving them out, then there's not much we can do about it. Otherwise, it's just going to be, I wouldn't say worse than hunter-gatherer times, or, it's just going to be people trying to kill each other because, in the pretense of moral righteousness and the pretense of ableism. So, but I think as human beings evolve, it's necessary to also understand that I think both sides have to, or not both, just both sides, it's hard because it's always a shouting contest. And why do you have to speak on behalf of an abstract idea, which is genders? What you have to speak on behalf of is yourself. But because society is trying to be individually abhorrent in terms of a collectivist state, how would I say this? Sorry, I'm not making much sense here. Like, we're becoming collectivist, and you might think that's a good thing, but in reality, we're going about it the wrong way. You look at Japan. Japan is a collectivist society. The right wingers are trying to push this idea of race and its moral supremacy onto one, and you're trying to blame another group for it. In truth, people, it's an individual problem. I've heard on the news that Japan has the highest rates of patricides and matricides. People kill their own families. I've never seen such. I mean, probably if you're talking about in other countries like Brazil or somewhat, I don't know, maybe, but most of the time here in Japan, this mother threw her baby down, and people are still trying to focus this issue on foreigners. Foreigners are just being obnoxious, that's all. They're not killing somebody, you've never heard a foreigner who gets a knife and stabs 20 Japanese people. You hear, though, that one Japanese guy just goes and starts stabbing multiple people on the train. But you still have the onus to blame another group because it's easier to blame than it is to reflect on the society overall and figure out what's going on. It's like, but, it's an individual issue that has sort of like misplaced, instead of, I've reflected back on my life and my mistakes, and I have to say, even if I say I had no choice in the matter, or I had a choice in the matter, it doesn't detract from the fact that during that moment, you make choices in which you tell yourself you don't really give a damn and you want it to be. I recently just started reading a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. And I'm just at the beginning, but roughly speaking, it's just like, as a, Gen Z, or I don't know, Gen X point, I don't know, Gen X point Y, whatever it is, Gen X point X. It's like, in order to solve this problem, we have to start cooperating. There's no other way. We have to figure out what's the pain of people instead of blaming and getting them, and then, in the end you have like this guy who shoots up a school or something like that because of, you know, he's being completely unheard of. Because his needs and his wants are completely unmet, and you tell him, it's your responsibility, it's your own fault, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know. Because as far as it goes, there's something that's coming that is, I don't know what to say, you know, not just World War III, but like, I think there's something that's going on, you know, like the whole world's just going fucking nuts because of maybe a potential super solar flare. I don't know, maybe it's pseudoscientific, I can't tell, man. That's what they say, but I think honestly the stronger a solar flare is, it's stronger, you know. After all, it's possible to have something like a super flare that can EMP everything back into the Stone Ages is quite possible, and so it's not really unscientific or pseudoscientific. It is quite possible. After all, you know, I mean, a meteorite striking Earth is what, you know, like that movie Don't Look Up. It's ridiculous. That scientists is just as much as fault as this conspiracy theorists. They're trying to put the onus on the conspiracy theorists actually, in reality, are the ones trying to tell you that there's a comet. The scientists are saying that the comet's going to just be okay, it's going to pass by us. The government's saying, well, okay, dude, that's the reality of the situation. But, of course, human beings, you know, it's easy to deny something than to accept something like what was that, you know, the Matrix Reloaded, yeah. Denial is the most powerful and first and foremost of all human responses. And ridicule is the second. You know, thinking back about when you study the Amazonian tribes, and you look at them like little kids versus with big adults, you know, people think, oh God, why are they dressed barely, you know, and people think, oh my God, there must be something wrong, you know, and then look at their rates of, you know, what happens. They have little rates of child abuse, rape, possibly like, I don't know, especially sexual deviancy, maybe, I don't know. Look at the native tribes of America. But here we have a modern phenomenon that's exacerbated by the toxicity of the modern environment that we live in. I can tell you why people are like that, you know, it's your frontal lobe. When you're, as a man, and when you're so devoid, like say you're so devoid of intimacy, love, care, your frontal lobe just refuses to respond in a state where it's about nurturing and protection. It starts thinking about sexualization because you're kind of conflicting the two. There was a case that this man, I think on YouTube, you've already known about that case where he had a seizure, but before that he started being interested in, you know, child, you know, abuse images, child sexuality, stuff like that. So, you know, but when they removed that, he stopped having those thoughts and he stopped consuming them. It's not to say that's an excuse, but there clearly is a correlation between. It's not a correlation. It's probably, but there is something that causes people to act like that, and we have to find out what it is. And it's not. What I'm trying to say is, we have to make a cure out of this. Despite there being saying there's no cure for that kind of sexual deviance, there is. We just are thinking that there's no hope for them. There is. I mean, after all, we're always going to have this problem with humanity because it's what our society produces. You know, we live in a double-edged civilization where damn if you do, damn if you don't, you know. So, we gotta fix this. Until then, if we, you know, don't fix it, there's not much we can say. We're gonna have this problem with us. You know, you can kill as much people as you want, you can kill the criminals, but in the end it's a genetic and scientific issue. They're gonna sprout out in the future. You can't even give birth to a criminal, or can give birth to like an abuser, you can give birth to even a predator, despite hating all your life this kind of people. And I'm not trying to like, oh, you know, turn and cope this kind of, but it is what it is, because, you know, like, I think maybe that's the reason why these people are trying to like get us to kill each other, so that we have a more manageable number to be dealt with, which is crazy, but that's the truth, you know. They really are trying to follow this ideology through. They're trying to, I can't really speak on the world's behalf, like I don't even want to get in touch with politics anymore. But clearly, you know, the powerful and the rich have always tried and done their best to make people control their minds. What the poor have always tried to follow the rich. It's quite simple as that, you know. Back then they tried emulating the rich aristocracies of France and every empire that's ever existed. But now, you know, the aristocracies have changed their, not changed, but just changed their methods. And the poor has no idea but to follow a certain rule that's been inscribed for them. Or the majority that have tried to follow, it's just a simple thing about, not simple, just like, in terms of reductionist statements, it's the, how do I say this, is those who are the majority and those who are the minority. And they have us thinking that the minority has got the best of all the things. It's what you ought to follow. And in reality, it's actually the majority, not the minority. We've forgotten that. And we think it's supposed to, the majority now are trying to follow the minority. That's not reality, that's not life, or that's not how we should survive and thrive. Now they're trying to blame the minority like Epstein, Bill Gates, oh, the rich and the powerful are always crazy like this. But in reality, you know, you'd be surprised actually. The majority is actually emulating the minority. What he's saying, he's saying that, oh, you say that we're all, you know. No, not necessarily. What I'm trying to say is like Zuckerberg, all these individuals that are very rich and powerful. People have been influenced by them already. And then, you know, let's just say they want to blame Andrew Tate, but the media is actually also trying to control that narrative because he's a puppet. So they got us believe that's all, you know. Well, you don't hear on the news about the powerful individuals. And they're not really to blame as well, you know. I mean, it's mostly the media and the news and people trying to like tell you what to believe and what to think. And like they, you know, like authoritarian governments and democratic governments, and then they're trying to like, oh yeah, yada yada. When in reality, the U.S. is just as authoritarian as China. The U.S. is as democratic as China is actually. You'd be surprised to hear that. I'm not going to touch it. Oh my god, I went to politics. But we have to cooperate, otherwise there's not much we can do. You know, there's not much we can do. Sometimes I've known females that are much more aggressive and vicious than males of their counterparts. Sometimes I've known males that are weaker than the weakest females of their certain counterparts. Life is not a dichotomy. Life is not A or B. Life is about, not even C. Life is about the middle point, which we think there is no. Like you cannot be in the middle point. There's no, you can't be on the fence. It's either you or me. It's either us versus them, or it's either this versus that. It's getting ridiculous, you know. Life is actually a spectrum. But people now just think that it's just easier to believe, just easier to subscribe to one of this. Well, as an individual, that's my 2 cents on it. Anyways,